Hi folks, I'm Glenn Peoples. What did the early church actually believe about hell? You see, just today, I read somebody claiming that, and I quote, hell as a place of eternal torment was the unanimous view of the early church fathers. Unanimous view. A prominent online Catholic source acknowledges actually that some later fathers embraced the view of origin and accept universalism, but apart from them, and I quote again, the fathers unanimously believed that the eternity of hell is clearly taught in the New Testament. Is that true? I mean, what about the view called conditional immortality? The view that only those whom God saves will receive eternal life, while the rest will die forever. Is that really a theological novelty that the fathers either all rejected or had simply never heard of? Well, as it turns out, not at all. Now, obviously, Christian representatives of all the major views on hell want to claim that the biblical writers were on their side. The gospel writers, Paul, Peter, James, all of them. And obviously, we don't agree about what the biblical writers meant. They repeatedly claim that God will destroy the lost, that they will die or perish, and so on. Those who hold to the traditional view know this, and they say that those terms shouldn't be taken in the most literal sense, and that they mean to be ruined or to be lost or something along those lines. And similarly, those who hold to the traditional view will point to things like Isaiah's description of the enemies of God with a fire that isn't quenched and worms that don't die, or Jesus' reference to eternal punishment. And conditionalists point out that in Isaiah 66, actually the things being burned and consumed by worms are dead bodies, and they insist that to be destroyed and gone forever actually is eternal punishment. And there are other passages used by both sides, as we know. The point is, we all know about phrases like die, perish, the unquenchable fire, eternal punishment, and so on. Now, I think one side has a better case than the other as to what these terms mean, but we disagree about what they mean. If you find a church father who just quotes the phrase eternal punishment or uses the term death, then obviously that's not enough to show the other side in this debate that this is a person who agrees with your view and not theirs, because we don't agree about what those terms mean. But sometimes the writers that we're talking about did more than simply quote the biblical language, and when they did, they provide some insight on how they interpret what the Bible means. The fact is, the writings of the earliest church fathers contain a few surprises for those who hold to what is now the traditional view. Let's start with the apostolic fathers. The apostolic fathers consist of 5 authors in the later 1st century who are so called because they likely had contact with the apostles of the New Testament. Admittedly, they don't say a whole lot about this subject. The Didache refers to the way of life and the way of death, which is to use the biblical language. Beyond that, however, a couple of the apostolic fathers made some comments that identify their views more explicitly. Let's start with Ignatius of Antioch. For this end did the Lord allow the ointment to be poured upon his head, that he might breathe immortality into his church. Be not anointed with the bad odor of the doctrine of the prince of this world. Let him not lead you away captive from the life which is set before you. And why are we not all prudent, since we have received the knowledge of God which is in Jesus Christ? Why do we foolishly perish, not recognizing the gift which the Lord has of a truth sent to us? Other fathers who clearly believed the traditional doctrine of hell, like Tatian, claimed that the lost will be immortal. Now, Ignatius here denies this. He said that the Lord gave immortality to his church, so those who reject the knowledge of God will perish. Ignatius confirms that this was his view in his letter to the Magnesians, where he said, "Let us not, therefore, be insensible to his kindness, for were he to reward us according to our works, we should cease to be." For Ignatius, then, the reward for sin is total death, to actually cease to be, and we will so perish unless we partake of the knowledge of God and receive the immortality that the Lord gave to those in his church. This view was clearly alive and well among the apostolic fathers, and so it's easy to see why another apostolic father, the writer of the epistle of Barnabas, would have said this: "It is well, therefore, that he who has learned the judgments of the Lord, as many as have been written, should walk in them. For he who keeps these shall be glorified in the kingdom of God, but he who chooses other things shall be destroyed with his works. On this account there will be a resurrection. On this account a retribution. I beseech you who are superiors, if you will receive any counsel of my goodwill, have among yourselves those to whom you may show kindness. Do not forsake them, for the day is at hand on which all things shall perish with the evil one. What's the point of God raising people to life again just to destroy them, some people ask. Well, this idea did not seem silly to Barnabas, who said that the destruction of the lost with their works and with all evil was the very reason for their resurrection. Their works will be no more. Evil will be no more. It's clear enough that this is what he meant, but they will be destroyed in the same sense. Let's move on to Irenaeus. Irenaeus of Lyons used a number of biblical phrases like outer darkness or eternal fire, and he also uses Isaiah's language of dead people being burned and consumed. But he also made it clear that the lost would not be alive forever. In addressing the issue, he compares people to the created universe, the stars, the heavens, and so on. They were created and they will exist as long as God determines. All things that have been made had a beginning when they were formed, but endure as long as God wills that they should have an existence and continuance. To have existence or continuance then means to go on existing, and the same is true of us. God made us, and we exist for as long as God decides. He thus speaks respecting the salvation of men. He asked life of thee, and thou gavest him length of days for ever and ever, indicating that it is the Father of all who imparts continuance for ever and ever on those who are saved. For life does not arise from us, nor from our own nature, but it is bestowed according to the grace of God. And so God gives continuance, ongoing existence, to those people that he has saved forever. It is bestowed as a gift, and Irenaeus follows this through to its conclusion. And therefore he who shall preserve the life bestowed upon him, and give thanks to him who imparted it, shall receive also length of days for ever and ever. But he who shall reject it and prove himself ungrateful to his Maker, inasmuch as he has been created, and has not recognized him who bestowed the gift upon him, deprives himself of the privilege of continuance for ever and ever. And for this reason the Lord declared to those who showed themselves ungrateful towards him, If ye have not been faithful in that which is little, who will give you that which is great? Indicating that those who, in this brief temporal life, have shown themselves ungrateful to him who bestowed it, shall justly not receive from him length of days for ever and ever. Many of those who write against the conditionalist point of view acknowledge that Arnobius of Sycha was a conditionalist, and they generally claim that he was the first, which is clearly not the case, but Arnobius was certainly a conditionalist. In his book Against the Heathen, he made his view very clear. This is man's real death, this which leaves nothing behind, for that which is seen by the eyes is only a separation of soul from body, not the last end, annihilation. This, I say, is man's real death, when souls which know not God shall be consumed in long protracted torment with raging fire, into which certain fiercely cruel beings shall cast them, who were unknown before Christ and brought to light only by his wisdom. But the reality is, Arnobius was simply saying that the lost would be destroyed with their works and that they would not have continuance forever. He was repeating in different words what great Christian teachers before him had said. Athanasius the Great was one of the most important theologians in the formation of Christian orthodoxy. Some people are surprised then to see what he had to say about human destiny. In his classic work on the Incarnation, Athanasius explains why God sent the Word, Jesus, into the world. God created humanity and gave us his law so that if we followed it, we would live. But because our first parents disobeyed, they were sent away from the garden, he says, no longer to live in paradise, but cast out from it from that time forth, to die and to abide in death and in corruption. And sin humans did. And now, just as they have had their being out of nothing, Athanasius wrote, they might look for corruption into nothing in the course of time. They would be everlastingly bereft of being. Unless God stepped in to save us, that which had shared in the being of the Word must sink back again into destruction. The message is clear. Once upon a time we didn't exist. And now because of sin, and unless God saves us, we will sink back into non-existence once more, which shows us what he means by the word destruction. However, by the grace of the resurrection, he says, God makes a way for us to become immortal, so that those who receive this grace can have life or being once more and forever. Elsewhere, when writing against the Arians, Athanasius clarifies that this is a promise to those who receive Christ, and not a universal immortality given to all people. For as he, having come in our body, was conformed to our condition, so we, receiving him, partake of the immortality that is from him. Awkward though it might be for a traditional view of hell, you've got here one of the most orthodox theologians of all time, claiming that because of sin, people are going to cease to exist, but that God has made a way for us to gain immortality instead, if we receive Christ. This was the same teaching that many others had taught, that if we received what our works deserve, we would cease to exist, but God will give eternal continuance and life to his people, his church, into whom he breathes immortality. Now, it would be naive to imagine that these 5 sources are irrelevant, outside voices that no one within the Christian faith really cared about, and they don't represent any movements within the church itself. That's not true. These were 5 highly influential teachers, and if they believed these things, then there were communities of Christians to whom they were teaching these things, and there were Christians within the church who had taught these things to these people, who we now regard as fathers of the church. The next really big name to come along after Athanasius was, of course, Augustine of Hippo, one of the most influential of all the church fathers. Now, there had been several who taught the doctrine of eternal torment previously, but there's no real doubt that it was Augustine, more than anybody else, whose influence cemented this as the teaching of the church. His prominence and his influence meant that conditionalism became a still, small voice until it began to appear more vocally in movements and figures associated with the Reformation. But it was certainly there in the beginning, and that is the point here. In some of the greatest, earliest spokespeople for the Christian faith after the New Testament writers themselves, and among some of Christianity's most orthodox theologians. Now, of course, this doesn't show you that conditional immortality is true or biblical, but hopefully it will encourage you to take another look. Rethink hell, and you'll be in good company. I'm Glenn Peoples.